Alright, I'm pretty excited about this video today because we're talking about camera tech, and I love to talk about camera tech. Here we're going back to the 1980s, actually, to kind of talk about the lack of camera tech, so it's sort of weird. But anyway, hey, I'm Sam, and today I'm talking about film, so old 35mm film. And that's right, I bought my own film camera. So this is a Minolta X-700. It's this tiny little film camera here, and I've been shooting with it for about the past month or so. And I think overall, I still have a ton to learn with film photography, but I'm done with my first roll of film, and I want to talk about some of the things that I learned from shooting on it, some of the successes I had, as well as some of the failures. So let's get right into it. Right off the bat, let's talk about composition. Obviously, composition is super important for photography in general, but I think film photography especially, because you don't have the opportunity to compose a ton of different shots on one roll of film. I mean, most rolls of film only have 36 exposures on them, at least in terms of 35mm film. So you really have to plan shots carefully and make sure they're composed really well from the get-go. You don't have the opportunity to get a million shots and keep looking. Like, when I shoot on digital, for example, I'll be able to, I'll take a picture, then I'll go into my playback and look at it and see what needed to be changed, make those adjustments, and then take another photo with the adjusted parameters or settings or adjusted composition as well. That's not something you can do with film. You don't have that instant knowledge of whether or not it worked out. So there is some guesswork involved, and that is challenging. I mean, having to compose shots without really knowing if they're going to work out or not is something that I need to get better at, and something I definitely struggled with along the way. As you can see in some of my shots here, some of these were just not super well composed. Some of these just needed more work. Some were big successes though. For the little 50mm lens I have, I'm pretty pleased with a couple of these. The composition turned out pretty good. And for portraits, 50mm is pretty good as well. Moving on to dynamic range and color. With film, the dynamic range and color is really based on the chemistry of your film. So if you buy different brands or even different stocks of film from the same brand, you're going to have a big difference in your HDR compatibility and how light is going to affect the color on your film and what your color ends up looking like. I mean, some film stocks will shift your film way towards green or blue or red or purple. There's a huge range of film stocks that you can use to accomplish the different color saturation and highlights that you're looking for. But for me, I shot on this roll of Fuji 200, I think it was, Fuji Color 200, and I really noticed that the dynamic range is not as good as my digital camera. Surprise, surprise. I definitely took photos like I was on my digital camera because I really just didn't know what to expect out of film. And this caused me to end up with some shots that were not properly exposed, or that were properly exposed in certain areas, but the film just didn't have the right dynamic range to get the full spectrum of light that I was looking for. And so some of these shots, you'll see there's some really dark sections here and some overall pretty well lit sections. So areas with a lot of super high light and super low dark contrast are really hard to shoot on certain film stocks, and this was something that I really noticed with this Fuji Color 200. I think going to black and white would be a way of potentially fixing this, where the darks come out really black and the lighter parts come out really bright white, and then in between there's kind of a gray scale. So there's ways to get around this with film photography, I know that. Just for my first roll, this was something that definitely took me by surprise. just to piggyback off of that, there are some of these shots that the colors turned out super good. Like this sunrise over Lake Superior is awesome. The colors turned out so good, and I don't know how, but I'm really pleased with that. Another one is this bright red neon sign. The red just is super vibrant, and the dark parts of this image really kind of faded into black here. I'm really pleased with how the colors turned out on these images, but definitely a mix of good and bad images in terms of like color and contrast. I think my biggest takeaway from shooting film is like you can't use film to instantly give your photos some nostalgia. So like a couple of these I was really just forcing the film to work, if that makes sense. Like I was really going for the nostalgic look of film, which is one of the things that really appeals to me, is how old film looks and how organic it looks. It's not something you can really force, it's something that just kind of has to work out. And so as you'll see in a couple of these, I took shots of like everyday objects and normal abandoned places and stuff, and film doesn't magically fix photos that are poorly composed. Going back to what I said at the start, like composure is so important, especially in film photography, and even the nostalgic look of film is not enough to fix my mistakes in that department. So that's my big takeaway there. It's like, it's just, even though film is a really nostalgic look, it's not pure magic. It doesn't fix everything. Just to talk really quickly about some of the photos that I'm really pleased with here. The Lighthouse photo. This is so nice. This Fujicolor 200 makes everything look a little bit washed. The blues are all really soft, and the whites of course look really good. The composure I think is pretty good as well, with just the lighthouse kind of dead center and having a fairly large vertical space to play with there. I'm really pleased with how this shot turned out. I like it a lot. Another shot I'm really pleased with is this little table here. There's so much like visual clutter in this shot, as well as like really nice colors. There's some nice greens, some nice blacks and grays. There's the light coming through the windows, so you get kind of the white highlights. Overall, I think the composure and the clutter of this shot, as well as the colors, really make this a pretty appealing and kind of nostalgic image, which is sort of what I was going for with this shot. And then like architecture, I think the 50mm lens did a pretty good job of keeping up with like architectural photos. And architecture, especially for older buildings, I think just looks really good on film. And so a couple of these images, as you can see, I'm really pleased with the composition, how there's kind of some nice sky in some of these. Going back to like the lighthouse, the blues just turn out so good on this Fujicolor 200. But yeah, overall, these are some pretty decent shots. Definitely things I need to work on, but pretty good overall. Alright, and that's going to be it for this video. I want to thank you for listening to me absolutely nerd out about film. I really enjoyed it. It's nice for me to be able to reflect on some of my mistakes and wins as well with this, and I definitely plan to keep shooting film. So if this is something that interests you and you want to hear back from me after I've shot more film photos, and if you like this format of video as well, where I kind of get a little bit more in-depth with the gear I'm talking about and the things that I learn from it, let me know down below. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on a different video like this, something that's not as just cinematic, something that's a little bit more technical. But yeah, regardless, give me your feedback, please. I'd love to hear what you thought. And yeah, I'll catch you in the next video. So thanks.